Top the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University, Edward Blishen, the writer, and Laurie Taylor, professor of sociology at York University. And we have music from Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida. Now, there's been a lot of talk this week about reputation, both inside and outside of the courtroom, and so I thought I'd get you to make things a bit clearer. Reputation, what is it? What makes people put such a value on it? Why do they instantly twang if it's impugned? Why are they willing to commit the ultimate insanity and go to law about it? Is reputation something everyone's born with? Or do you have to construct it personally? It's one of those words used easily and taken for granted. But have you ever stopped and wondered what it actually means? I hope all of you have, otherwise the conversation's dead before we start.
Well, I think it's what people know about you who don't know you. I mean, in other words, it's an oxymoron. The people who know us are our family, our friends and our neighbours. People who don't know us either know nothing about us at all, or they know one usually quite trivialising and inaccurate thing, like Shirley Williams always loses trains, or Naren Bevan thought that the Tories were lower than vermin. And I think that's a problem with reputation, that it is actually a trivialising of somebody. And I suppose in a way one doesn't mind being trivialised in a favourable way, but when that trivialisation then goes in an unfavourable way and something bad about yourself is said, then people object. And I'm sure one reason that they object is that when you go to school, you're libelled every single day in the playground, that people say awful things about you, you've got no regrets. When you become an adult, you have actually got the power of the courts, and I think that's one reason we have the libel laws.
Well, I think that's a sub, sort of category, really, but we'll come back to it.
I think the paradox is that you say that people have got to go to court to protect their reputation or to re-establish their reputation, but I think it's only in court that you find out whether you've got one or not, because when you arrive there you may not know, and it may indeed be the court decides that you didn't have one that could be injured in the first place. And when we've talked about this before, we've often said, for example, how much was, say, Sir Robert Mark's reputation damaged by the fact that he did a commercial for tyres, or how much is Barry Norman's commercial for mortgages damaging to his reputation. Then we've considered the difference between reputation and image, because reputation seems to be something like the lustre that is added to the weight of accomplishments, isn't it? That there is a set of things that...
That's a nice phrase. Isn't that wonderful?
Oh, well, anyway, so there's a whole series of things that you do, but then you don't necessarily acquire reputation, which is some sort of credit rating which goes on over the top of all the work that you've done previously. But you don't know, as you sit here, whether or not you've got one.
Well, I don't think... I think on the whole, we know that it's very difficult to have a reputation. We know from the way we talk about others that we ourselves must be subject to libel and slander continuously. People are writing about us in a rather... what would be to us a deeply displeasing way. It's not often meant to be a wounding thing. I mean, we just are privately behind our friends' backs rather wounding about them, and we know that people are wounding about us. And it seems to me what happens when you have a libel case is that we all pretend that, in fact, we are taken rather well by our acquaintances and so on. In a libel case, what happens then is that somehow the other view of ourselves has surfaced, and it's intolerable, and we actually do something about it.
Yeah.
Well...
When something's happened to your reputation, it's rather like losing your no-claims bonus, isn't it? Or having your licence endorsed, as you say. It's the moment when people suddenly will no longer give you the benefit of the doubt. But there's also a kind of double bluff thing about it. People, for instance, talk about a sport. There was some poor rugby player recently who was sort of dragged over the coals for having brought the game into disrepute. Now, this is interesting because here we have
all he did was bite a chap's ear off.
Yeah, and that's all he did exactly. But I mean, it rather sort of presupposes that you go around thinking, well, that's a reputable game to be playing. You know, this will do your reputation some good. It's a curious double bluff. And also, when we say somebody's disreputable, that has an affectionate connotation, it seems to me. Reputable is solid. It's something that builds up with a drip, drip, drip over the years. It's nothing very glamorous. But disreputable, you could be very successful and be disreputable.
Yeah, but these are all subcategories. You won't get at it. Let me offer you this notion that we are all born, it is all part of our birthright to have a reputation. while it is intact, it is invisible. It is only when it is, as it were, damaged that you have to put polyfiller, or as it seems, money in it to complete it again. It isn't to do with a reputation for accuracy or a reputation as a Don Juan or a reputation for being mean or a reputation for this or that. The reputation that you wish to protect is the thing that is commonly owned from the word go.
But I think, you see, the very notion that you have no reputation, Bob, your notion of the sort of the child born without a reputation is untrue. All of us have reputations. At the very moment you're born, you have the reputation which adheres to you because you're the child of certain parents and so on. So you're already, in fact, fixed. There is no person about whom, however tiny, about whom nobody has an opinion. An opinion begins to adhere to a child as soon as it's born, I think.
But it's I think you've made an excellent point there, but it is the nearest you come to a clean slate,
True.
Isn't it? And I would have said that reputation was a negative condition.
Yes.
And it's only made positive when you are made disreputable.
I was struck today that there was a review in The Guardian of that new dictionary of that new volume of the Dictionary of National Biography, people who died between 1971 and 1980, and Roy Hattersley, reviewing it, said that there was still hanging about it some of that feeling of the old tag, say nothing bad about the dead, but just because they've been recently dead. And he explored the idea one has that people can be quite recently dead and you still feel rather delicate about them. Obviously you don't feel delicate about Genghis Khan because he's been dead for a long time. Presumably a few months after Genghis Khan died, people were writing about him rather delicately and thinking, well, mustn't say something too awful about him.
Couldn't quarrel with a word you say, Edward. Would like to, but can't. Now,
I
Sarah.
agree, absolutely, that reputation is a kind of blank wall on which the graffiti of life is thereafter written.
Oh, that's another jolly good
one,
phrase,
isn't it? But you see, there are all sorts of subtle nuances about the way we use the word. If we talk about reputation with a personal pronoun, his reputation, her reputation, we don't qualify it. This is the one that we've been referring to, the blank slate, that simply means he hasn't done anything wrong yet. If we say he has a reputation for this or for that, then that's when we're starting to get nitpicking. That is the great smokescreen that the gossip puts up when they want to say, I am not actually blackguarding this person, but I will tell this other person, oh, well, you know, he's got a bit of a reputation. There's another phrase. We all know it only means one thing. So there are all sorts of ways you can use it.
This blank slate thing can't get by. I mean...
Oh, dear.
Just your very surname, if it's, say, an Irish surname, you've begun with some sort of stereotype.
Well, that's what Edward
if you're
was
born
making
in
the point
Chicken
about.
Sodbury or somewhere, or Milton Keynes, you've got another stereotype. One of the great human things is we always gossip about people. We cannot accept a clean white slate, Bob. We begin filling it up with stereotypes and imaginings from the moment of birth. So what I'm trying to say is that we all, in a sense, have ridiculous reputations. We have to put up with this until something goes into print, and then we make some vain attempt to wrest it back into something not quite so ridiculous.
Well, mostly, you know, most people's reputations don't come anywhere near print. But I want to ask you this. If a reputation is damaged, and you can hear a rhetorical question coming up because you've been here often enough, if a reputation has been damaged, is it totally damaged? And this reminds me of an ancient anecdote, or joke even, 18th century grandee discussing his daughters with a prospective suitor, and he says, I shouldn't have Mildred, she's ever so slightly bow-legged, and he says, Lottie has got this very, very slight turn in her eye. Now I think you're best off with Alice. And the suitor says, well, you mean there's nothing wrong with her? Well, the bloke says, not really, she's just a teeny weeny bit pregnant. Now, the thing is there, you're either wholly pregnant or you're wholly reputable. If you are only a teeny weeny bit reputable, you are only a teeny weeny bit pregnant.
But that's a nice thing about
You can't have
reputations
it.
being restored, because the idea that sort of some people try to cultivate their bad reputations and want to hang on to their bad reputations. I was thinking a little tiny bit the other morning, listening to a radio programme in which Mandy Rice Davis was talking about her most recent book. And I was thinking as there were people questioning and saying, well, it was nice to see that this book isn't full of what one might expect it to be full of, and it turns out to be really rather a good book. But you thought that perhaps it might be a case where it would be really rather nice to have a bad reputation which went on accompanying it, because after all, whether or not you can move from a bad reputation to a good reputation in a lifetime, it reminds the story of, you were talking about a little anecdote, but the story of the story of Eva Peron, who was riding around in some sort of motorcade with a retired admiral through the streets of Milan after she was in fact enjoying considerable power in Argentina, and as she drove through the streets she heard the shout, somebody shouted out "Hur" from the side, and she turned to the man next to her and said, "Do you hear what they're shouting? They're shouting 'Hur' at me." And he said, "Oh, I shouldn't worry about that." He said, "They still call me Admiral." And so that was 15 years ago. He said, but so that here are examples of two sorts of reputations.
But you see, both of these little jokes that we've offered show how worried everyone is about how they are received in this way. I do not think it's image. I don't think it's that. I think it's much deeper.
You see, Bob, as the writer of autobiography, therefore a man given to libel, I have found that writing clearly books in which the people actually exist, I find that people would rather sometimes be libelled than left out. But one of the,
Yes.
one of the things...
Bit of a risk, though, Edward.
No, I know. I walk on a tightrope. I'm a very brave man in this respect. But the point is, I think we talk about reputation as if everybody... we're actually skirting on this now, but as though everybody wanted a good reputation. Some people want a reputation of some kind. It hardly matters what. It is an identity, actually. And some people actually are quite glad to have an identity. However, to another person, it might be abhorrent. I remember when I wrote my first book, it was about, in fact, the school in which I was teaching. And I had, in my naive and dangerous way, written about, I think in a kindly, but nevertheless not entirely respectful way, about a colleague of mine. And he presented a copy of the book and said, "Will you sign it?" The original of, and he named the... And I was so innocent, I signed it. I mean, he could have gone straight to the court.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say he went straight round and you were done.
But the fact is, he was pleased to be there and would have been, I think, terribly cross not to be there.
That is the subcategory reputation. It simply means known for being a womanizer, known for being fond of a drink, known for being good at tennis.
True, reputation can be good
which is a rather
reputation.
secondary consideration.
Is it not also? I mean, are we not saying that it's really only people whom you might call sort of being in the public domain who have a reputation? I mean, it's incredible to come down to the absolute opposite end of the scale. I attempted to park my car one evening and take the train into London without getting a parking ticket or whatever from British Rail's office. I said, "Look, for heaven's sake, it's only going to be there an hour before the time for parking tickets expires." And the man said, "Well, I have my reputation to think of." And you sort of think to yourself, well, really, does he have this reputation?
Of course
It's a sort of
he
dreadful
has.
adherence to form, like it's more than my job's worth.
No, you see, we're talking about two sorts of reputation. The old one, I think, is the sort of Shakespearean one, where Othello felt he'd lost face with the club, the sort of patriarchal thing. He was a man known to be a good general. Now, I'd have thought nowadays that sort of reputation doesn't go for so much, that we judge people like Dickens and Tolstoy not just on their public faces, but on their private faces. We see Tolstoy and Dickens as husbands as well as writers. Now, that sort of reputation is impossible for us to know after they're dead. And therefore, all these things we hear about people are much less important, I'd have thought, in our estimation of them.
That reminds me that I think reputations sometimes depend on reputations. For example, we all take part in this programme, so if Bob was disgraced, we would all feel disgraced and we would all pretend we'd never taken part in the programme.
Who says he's not disgraced?
I found myself... Have you been disgraced? I'm sorry.
It came to the attention of the authorities. However, nothing was proved.
And the
But
sheepdog
you see,
was a friend.
I found this in connection with my grandson recently. I went into his school. My grandson's age 8 or 9. I went into his school to talk about being a writer. They invited me to talk about being a writer. And Sam sat at my feet and he said, "What nice shoes you've got." And it was but then at the end, he put his hand up at question time and said, "Are you a famous writer?" And I, considering this difficult question, I could hear the background to it in the playground. My grandfather's a famous writer. Your grandfather's not a famous writer. He is. And I realised that I had Sam's reputation in my hands, which depended on my reputation. So I could only say, sort of famous.
I said about being insane if you go to law. I nearly did it myself in the day, years back now, when Tynan first mentioned the sacred word on television, and I was sitting there, and the next day in one of the papers it said Robinson was sitting there with a lecherous leer on his face, and I thought, no, I wasn't. I was sitting there with a face as long as a fiddle and thinking satire turned out just to be show business yet again. So I went round to the lawyer. I said, "What about this lecherous leer?" He said, "It's a very good case." He said, "But don't go near it." He said, "It'll take 2 years to come up, and when it comes up, you might win, but you'll always be known as the man with the lecherous leer on his face." And when his bill came in, I paid it with some enthusiasm for that very sensible advice. So my sensible advice now is we should all shut up for a bit and have a jolly nice song from Dillie. It's called Fast Reputation.
If you want to be famous, get a fast reputation, but talent's a thing you ain't got. If you want to be fated without perspiration, 'cause you don't want to work, not a jot. There are so many ways to be a major celebrity. Be a bimbo, be a bimbo. It's the speediest route to the top. Go to parties with the smarties. Give your friends from suburbia the chop. If you long to be a big fish in the pond, wear body map clothes and dye your hair blonde. Date a gangster or Robert Sangster, or pursue a career in pop. If you hanker for stardom, you can't be too choosy about what you'll do for success. You'd best be called Angie, Samantha, or Susie, and often fall out of your dress. If page 3 has you bearing your silicone nays, you're bound to be mobbed by the shoppers in Safeways. Be a bimbo, be a bimbo. Oh, a man can be one as well. Host a game show, watch your fame grow. You must blow dry your hair and use gel. And each time you visit a nightclub in town, on exiting, knock a photographer down. Take a villa in Spain and be done for cocaine, and you'll soon have a story to sell. If you're dumped by a lover with assets substantial, temper your grief with something financial. And if you're in debt to get off the hook, publish your memoirs or your own beauty book. Be a bimbo, be a bimbo. Concentrate on your reputation. Brain in limbo, legs akimbo, and you'll rise below your station. Hang about looking glam in the pits at TT's. Take up photography, it's a breeze. A mindless existence, all it takes is persistence and loads of determination. Think of Warhol's claim, 15 minutes of fame. For a bimbo, pure intoxication.
She said it all. Dillie Keane there singing Fast Reputation. Another topic. Not keen on collections of things. You'll see how relevant that statement becomes. I do feel vaguely unpatriotic not being more worried that the National Gallery can't afford another Monet, and yes, on the basis of gumption, I have to hand it to the Chinese youth who collects autographs. He scored handsomely getting the Queen's. Not only was it the Queen's, but among all those other Chinese signatures, he's going to stand out nicely. But when it's lawnmowers or cheese labels that are being collected, you see much more clearly why you don't do it yourself. Looking at these cheese labels, or it might be tins of metal polish or milk bottles or even prams. One man collects prams, also mail carts and bassinets. When you see loads of the same sort of thing all in one place and doing nothing, the gloom that settles on you comes from knowing you're looking at something that's stopped, something that's inert, something that, in being collected, has been petrified. There's a sad picture in a book on collecting I've been looking at. I think you also have. I see it lying about there. Yes. A photograph of a lot of 19th century planes, the sort of planes you played wood with, and they're sitting on shelves like old people who have suffered strokes. They've been collected, they've been paralysed. And then think about stamp albums filled with all those dead stamps that you couldn't stick on a real live letter. Well, I found this book, which they rather oddly call Collecting the Passionate Pastime. I found the book reinforced the creepy feeling I've always had that the shared element of all collections is their deathliness.
Absolutely, yes. I agree with every word of that. In particular, I only add to it that there is an idea these people have that by assembling all these things, by getting 3,000 milk bottles or 2,000 planes or 1,600 prams or whatever it is that goes on, that some meaning thereby emerges. It's like a pathological inductionism by which you put all these dots, which are of equal size and shape, next to each other, and then you stare at it and hope that some pattern has emerged. In fact, nothing emerged except the craziness of the collector.
Anyone go counter to that?
I totally disagree with you.
He does. Good.
Dreadful
Yes.
things you've been saying.
Just as well.
I mean, I think that lawnmower man is a very good example. He reminds me in fact, the jealousy that you and Laurie have for the passionate collector. You can't even allow them to be passionate. Now, a man who collects 70 different sorts of lawnmower reminds me of the Eskimo who has 70 different words for snow. What he can see, Bob, is infinite variations, marvellous subtleties in lawnmowers that you and Laurie are just blind to. He's in touch, as it were, with the poetry of lawnmowers. G.K.
I've heard
Chesterton-
impudence in my time.
No, this is absolutely true. You see something dull, he sees something which
That's
is
not the point.
wonderful beyond words. Now, who comes out on top? Him or you? Him, of course.
I think you can have an investigation of whether or not lawnmowers and the meaning of the difference between lawnmowers, in fact, is central to life, and whether or not there might be other things that should have regard and which might have to say more about
He's not listening. Look, he's just smiling as though he's well pleased with
I
what he
think you
just
can,
said.
I can mediate between you, I'm sure. I remember the beginning of the worst of it. I mean, the worst of collecting is the worst of collecting. I remember in the playground at school in the 1920s, the days of cigarette cards, the chaps who actually completed their sets, which were usually 50 cards, and I never had more than 37, I should think, or perhaps 19. So I've all my life been a chap who got 19 out of 50. Right at the very beginning. But the chaps, the barons, the people who collected things and completed sets had a kind of ruthless quality, and they had a determination which was really rather displeasing. On the other hand, I recognise myself as another kind of collector, an amasser of things. I mean, I amass books and theatre programmes and
But
so on.
only to read.
No, well, in a sense, Bob, you see, unless there were collectors, I don't think we'd have any history. Would we? Because history is only based on the habit of collection. Collecting things that at the time you don't understand the importance of, actually. That all of history. I mean, surely all of history is based on accidentally preserved objects or papers, documents and bits
Anything
and pieces.
accidentally preserved has not been collected. Let's return to that in a second after Sarah
I
speaks.
absolutely agree. That's the Rolling Stone school of collection, isn't it? Where you just sit and things amass around you. That is not the same thing at all as this unhealthy obsession. Now, you refer to the playground,
you
the
get on
cigarette,
at him,
the
Sarah.
cigarette cards and so on. Collecting, fortunately, is something that most of us grow out of. Children do it obsessively. Now, I have had two sort of collecting manias in my time, happily grown out of. The first was marbles, but a lot of teenage or childhood collection is to do with currency. This is the currency of the playground, the collectors. The next thing was theatre programmes like you, which I'm happy to say I ritually burnt many years ago. But the thing about it is that so many of the things then become simply everything you see is processed by your collector's eye. I could see in myself the unhealthy tendency simply to go to the theatre in order to get the programme to add to the collection, and so it went on. I think it's terrible.
I don't think many people who are hearing this, though, I think the way we're talking about it, there are many people hearing it, but they will probably think, well, good, I'm not a collector. Because probably people, apart from the people pictured in the pages of this book standing amongst their 3,000 milk bottles, like the Hills who go spending their weekends foraging through woods in order to find another rare specimen of a milk bottle, apart from those sorts of people, most people probably don't like to be thought of as collectors. And indeed, if you arrive round at someone's house and you look and you say, oh, what pleasant watercolours, do you collect them? That is an insult, isn't it? To declare, in fact, that people have gone out to put things into a series rather than collected them one at a time for their intrinsic merit.
Could I just say, I mean, you know, this has to be faced for those of us who are against collections. The collections that are admirable and excellent in many ways, that's to say collections of pictures such as at the National Gallery. Now, there is nowhere else you can go to see all the pictures you could otherwise not see. There's nowhere else you can go to find out what... I haven't finished. There is nowhere else you can go to see the continuing tradition. However, when you get there, speaking for me, there's a kind of residual surliness, a kind of resistance to it, and I know what it is. It is that the actual presence of so many versions of the same sort of thing actually takes off from seeing each individual item, because each individual item, even though it be a matchbox, but here I'm talking about good pictures, was painted and presented to be seen on its own in a collection. However so good, the collection itself looms larger than the individual items that are members of it.
Yes, but I don't see
You didn't listen to a word, right?
I heard every word of that, Bob, and I think you're opting out of the argument by talking about the National Gallery, because collecting pictures...
It's called the National Gallery ploy.
Collecting pictures is not the same, dare I say it, as collecting milk bottles.
No,
now,
fine.
I saw this picture of this man surrounded by 3,000 milk bottles. I didn't think this was unhealthy. The first thing I felt was, good God, I thought, there's a milk bottle
You
I haven't
didn't.
seen. I did. I said, there's a milk bottle I haven't seen for 45 years. And I remembered how beautiful milk bottles looked, together with trolley buses and pillar boxes when you were young. And
You're
then
a
you
jolly
get
decent
old,
sort of chap,
and you
you
get
know.
blary-eyed, and you lose that excitement. These collectors are people who kept the excitement of being young and seeing things as they first were. And I think our reaction to them is petulant and jealous.
Oh,
I think we've got something they've got
dear.
a Wordsworthian feeling we haven't got.
I do think the daft collector, or the collector one thinks of as daft, or in fact one thinks of sadly sometimes, is a necessary sort of a chap at the very bottom of the pile of collectors. I remember reading a sad story once about a man who went to interview one of the great collectors of boys' comics. And I remember the man was a railwayman living at York, and the interviewer went and knocked at the door of the house, and the door was opened, and there, framed in a huge mass of comics, piled up on each side of the door and over the top, forming a kind of lintel of comics inside the lintel of the door, stood the collector. And behind him was a vista of comics, and it was quite clear that the house was entirely occupied by comics. And the interviewer and the collector said to the interviewer, "I'm very sorry, I can't give you any hospitality. My wife has left me." But that is a kind of great sadness and almost a disease of collection. But I do believe, to bridge all our feelings about this, that probably that daft collector, who is obviously driven by an urge which he cannot resist, lies behind. I mean, Hans Sohn was a collector whose collection led eventually to the British Museum. So presumably there are gradations of daftness, which eventually...
You see, I don't think they're daft, or if they are fully entitled to be, you see, because I'm running collecting down, but I'm not running individual collectors down, because the man who collects the milk bottles or the matchboxes, it turns around and says to you or to me, "Well, all right, Squire, if you don't like them, they're not on view, they're not for you, you're not invited to partake, they're mine, leave me alone. What's so insecure about you that you should run me down?" And I wouldn't be doing that, but I'm slightly leery, as they say, of collections and collecting.
The only person that I liked in the collection was the man who collected what are called insults, which is an acronym standing for "I've never seen one like that." Why I liked that was because the rest of the book is a celebration almost of the importance of objects, and this man seems to be almost subverting objects. It seems, when you talk about the idea of collecting paintings, or that you can say, "Well, I want to collect this, and this is the reason that I give for it," I'm talking here about most of the people in this book who are collecting objects when so much attention is already given to objects in this world. I mean, advertising, the accounts that appear daily telling us to buy this or that consumer good, are celebrations of objects rather than human beings. And these people seem to me like, as you say, like the children of young, who spend their ages bouncing a ball against the wall to see how many times they can catch it.
I caveat against, the chap who collects the "I've never seen one like that," where everything is a singleton. Singleness loses its singleness, and variety becomes uniform.
Yes,
doesn't it? Really,
yes,
in a way.
yes,
But
yes.
I reject this creepy thing. What we're saying is that our lifestyle is right and other people's are wrong. Now, I think a lot of this, as I say, it comes down to a sort of feeling of jealousy. That I well remember boys at school who were very good collectors of newts or cigarette cards or something, and there was I with my stamp album with about 3 stamps in it, then nothing, a living testimony to my inability to stick at anything. Now here we have these collectors, they do all the things that we were told to do when we were young. They stick at things, they concentrate, they actually do something.
I've always thought of this in terms of I am a hoarder. My wife is a thrower away, and between us, I think we create a relationship which is probably a useful human relationship. That is, that if I were left to myself, I'd be buried in objects. If my wife were left to herself, she would be, the wind would whistle past her, and there'd be nothing to protect her from life. Between us, we managed to produce a kind. So I think the combination of the collector and the anti-collector, the combination.
I should have thought it made for strife. There's a very violent play to be written there.
What you like best of all? Coming back to the psychological thing, which you remind me. What you like best of all is for people to believe that the things that you've got around your house have been almost randomly collected, that they just happen to be there, almost as though impelled by the magnetism of your own aesthetic. They've made their own way into your house.
Including your wife.
Yes, that's right. And that's almost why that sort of like lovely word bric-a-brac, is that just, because bric-a-brac, so the idea that everything there is random and that you can look around, and But sometimes it's as though collecting, and this is the other psychological component, creeps up on you, and you find that you have been collecting and that you didn't mean to be. And that's why it is rather like the schoolboyish. And you suddenly realise you do have 16 Safeways plastic bags laid one on top of the other, and it cannot be because you need those plastic bags to go out to do the shopping.
I came across the word, if I've got it right, it was either completionist or completist. The other day, I forget where, and it describes, apparently, a collector who is really only interested, not in the quality of what he collects, but in getting the very last one of it.
Yeah.
If you want the very last one of whatever it is, you're a completionist. But have you ever had the experience of being the coveted object that the collector wants to scoop up? I would, of course, have not asked you that question had I not been. Now, one of the founding fathers of the Penguin Empire, his name slightly escapes me, he was a German, Hans... it'll come to you. Schmoller? I think it was. Anyway, he had, as you probably remember, a complete archive, a complete collection of all the penguins that ever were, except for one. A collection of pieces they published in 1965. Did I have a spare one? No, I didn't have a spare one. I had one. I wanted to keep it. I didn't even reply. I was so worried about being the only person who couldn't complete his collection. 18 months passed. I found a copy of it in a second-hand bookshop, bought it for 50 pence, sent it off to him, marked at last. But my feeling was that I was so glad to get... I was agitated when I thought about it. There I was. It was as though there I was, a cabbage white, passing himself off, not by any choice of my own, but by this man's, as some kind of rarity.
You give a lovely little
I'm glad
touch
when it was over.
That Cabbage White reference is a lovely touch for that Lady Lambton's description of her butterfly collection in this. And somebody says to her, and this is the pure statement of the obsessive collector, they said to her, well, you don't seem to have any moths here. And to which she replied, no moths, please, they give me the Jim Jams.
But I think the point of your story, Bob, is that you actually did send this book on. And I thought...
It worried me until I found one.
But I think that's the tribute that the non-collector pays to the collector, that we don't actually want to have all these things in our houses. But when we do find something that they want, a little bit of us is really very much on their side. And I think the reason is that if you actually do visit them, they've actually got something really quite interesting to look at. If they come to our houses, what have we got? What do we collect? Family photographs. What could be done other than that? Otherwise, what else do we talk about when the conversation runs out? The collector's got something there of great interest. He sacrifices his marriage, his happiness, everything to that. And it's a goal worth supporting.
I will allow that the people who collect could be understood to be peculiar, and that is an honourable estate, to be peculiar and to be recognised as such. I knew a man, he's gone to his reward now, alas, and he weighed 22 stone. He had the best collection in, I think, Europe or the hemisphere of toy soldiers, and he was a gynaecologist. And as I stood at the back of him, watching his thick red braces as he delivered my second child, I found myself thinking, it was going through my head, is this chap peculiar? And if so, what makes him so? Is it the 22 stone? Is it the collection of toy soldiers? Or is it because he's a gynaecologist? And I couldn't work it out.
Sarah Harrison, Nicholas Tucker, Edward Blishen and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Dillie Keane provided the musical interlude and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.